What's trending today?
As you know, we wrapped up this week, I'm kind of a numbers dork, so we wrapped up this week in Washington, D.C. with a spending bill being passed, which we didn't really know a whole lot of. We're still trying to break down some of the details of a $1.2 trillion government spending bill to avert the government shutdown. The scary, fearful government shutdown. The Senate passed it on Thursday, apparently 74-24, with the House ramming it through 286-134. To talk about that, we had to bring our guest on the program. He's a good friend of mine. He's my congressman here in the 4th Congressional District in the great state of Kansas. To give us a recap, as he is on the Ways and Means Committee in the House.
Let's go to the Hoosier Media Hotline.
To talk about some of that and more from the 4th Congressional District here in Kansas, my good friend, Congressman Ron Estes. Congressman, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Andy?
I'm doing so good. It's so good to get you on here, and I appreciate you jumping on for the weekend. What a way to ram through a bill here at the end of the week, isn't it, Congressman? We didn't know much about this one. We didn't apparently abide by the 72-hour rule that we wanted to have to avert this government shutdown. But, Congressman, I want to start off with the fact that explain the process of this one to me, because I was under the assumption that we had passed like 11 of our 12 appropriation bills already through the government. So we only had one appropriations bills left, which was our military homeland security. And then this guy comes out. Is this what this was to compensate for that? What's the deal here?
So, no, actually, the House originally last year in 2023 was able to pass 7 of the 12 bills before September 20th. The Senate had passed, I think, 2 or 3 through the committee, and then they were looking at additional processing. So, as been typical customary fashion for the last 25 years, instead of getting the job done by September 30th, so we can start the fiscal year October 1st, they'll do a continuing resolution, which basically means we spend the same amount of money under the same programs that was set up in the prior fiscal year. And that's been continued twice now, after it started with the Speaker McCarthy, and then after the vacate in the chair occurred, and Speaker Johnson was kind of under the gun to keep processing moving forward. So one of the things Speaker Johnson did was split it into 2 different sections. Instead of having all 12 appropriations bills to fund the discretionary part of the federal government, he split it into originally it was 4 and 8, and then during one of the 3 different continuing resolutions, it ended up being split 6 and 6. And so the first 6 were passed by the House and the Senate at the beginning of March. I think it was March 8th was the day, and then the other 6, the remaining 6. So the first 6 were the easiest ones. They were the ones that are less argument about. In this last 6, it included funding for Department of Defense, included funding for Homeland Security, included funding for Health and Human Services and the Labor Department, Education Department. Wasn't end up getting a little bit more politically contentious through this process. So this was the final appropriations for the discretionary funding for fiscal year 2024, now that we're halfway over. I mean,
now that we're halfway, we're 6 months into the federal budget now. So we spend $1.2 trillion on that final appropriation. So now it's all done. But talk about some of the details, because I know that there's some heat about what's in this bill about funding late-term abortions or not including immigration in this bill, or whatever's being thrown out there by the media. Is that true or not? And what's actually some of the details in this bill? Because I've heard there's some good for the actual national defense and military, but what else is in this?
Yeah, and this 6, you're talking about $1.2 trillion, but that's just for the 6. And if you add all 12 together, it was over $1.7 trillion in total. And there were some good provisions in this bill. I mean, it included a 5% pay raise, 5.2% pay raise for our troops. And with as bad as Biden inflation's been the last 3 years, that's an important part to help them actually take care of their families and take care of themselves. But there were so many, in a lot of cases, earmarks. The old earmarks have reared their head back up, and adding a lot of funding for all of these, for so many locations, centers that actually provide abortion and support through that, and LGBTQ centers. So there was a lot of horrible slush spending in here. And the same thing that's most sad to me is that last May, the House and the Senate passed the debt limit bill, which was to limit spending for 2024 at $1.59 trillion. And here we are 8 months later, 9 months later, and they couldn't contain themselves, had to spend more than that, in addition to not getting the job done. So it's really creating a bigger and bigger problem for us as we continue to focus on, the debt's continuing to grow. It's over $34.5 trillion now, and actually in calendar year 2023, it grew by $2.6 trillion. The debt did. Wow. And we've got to get serious and focus on that. And so some things have to be done differently. There's certainly a lot of Republicans that want to address that, and there's a few Democrats. I mean, I'm working with a few in a bipartisan group trying to talk about ways we can do this, but overwhelmingly, we just got to change the way we're doing things.
We really do. Yeah, we're talking with Congressman Estes from the 4th Congressional District here in the state of Kansas, my congressman here in the south central portion of Kansas. Moving forward now, like you said, we are 6 months into our federal budget, so it's good that we've actually passed it now, our appropriation bills to fund us for the rest of the way. Now begins the conversation for the 2025 federal budget. Any optimism that we can have that one done by the actual time that the 2025 federal budget kicks in, which is October 1 of this year? Can we actually get that ball rolling now?
So, there's a possibility for it, but we've got to break a lot of bad habits that we've gotten into over the last 25 years to go through that. One thing that I'm optimistic about is, not only am I on Ways and Means Committee, but I'm also on Budget Committee this session, and we have passed out of our committee a budget for next year, which actually is less than what was just appropriated for 2024. So we're gonna work with the Speaker to bring that to the House floor and get that budget passed. And typically the way it does at the federal government is the budget's supposed to set the template for what the appropriation dollar amounts are. Unfortunately, for so many years, that's been waived and ignored through the process, and appropriators just go with whatever they can agree to with leadership from the House and the Senate and the White House. So hopefully we can be able to drive our budget this year and address the excess spending that we've got over the revenue that's coming in, and be able to help drive down our deficit, which ultimately means we can focus on how do we get our debt down.
Yeah, we're going to have to. And for those that don't know, that are listening all over the country, you and I have known each other for a really long time because you are our state treasurer here in Kansas for a while, now being congressman on the Budget Committee, on the Ways and Means Committee. So you're a numbers guy and you understand this, and you're seeing the financial cliff that we're getting close to, which, like you said, we have to address this and change some really bad habits, which trying to tell Washington, D.C. to change habits is a very difficult thing to do for sure. But while we pass the discretionary funding, that's done now. We've talked about this before. The mandatory spending portion of the federal budget continues to grow, which is roughly 70 to 80% of the actual federal budget, and we're not even touching that. So it's nice we're finally starting to even talk about discretionary, but we got a whole other beast that we have to start addressing here, don't we?
Yeah, we really do. And unfortunately, it gets caught up in the politics, and you even heard it at what President Biden was calling his State of the Union address, was, going out saying, well, I'm not going to allow anybody to cut Social Security. And the problem is, with him sticking his head in the sand like that, what he's admitting that he's going to do is cut Social Security recipient checks by 23%. And in the meantime, as we talk about $34.5 trillion debt right now, that doesn't include the increase in the cost of Social Security, increase in the cost of Medicare, increase in the cost of Medicaid. Those I call them automatic spending programs because there's really nothing mandatory. Everything can be changed. But it's a matter of we've got to focus on so many issues out there. And if we don't start working now to protect and preserve Social Security, it's not going to be the benefit that our seniors expect and need. And the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid. Our interest payments are becoming so big, they're starting to crowd out other things. Next next fiscal year in 2025, our number one payment by the federal government will be for Social Security checks. The number two payment will be interest on the debt. Number three payment will be for Medicare. And the number four largest payment will be for our Defense Department. So already we're pushing defense down behind interest in these other automatic spending programs.
Which is wild because that's supposed to be one of the main priorities government has. I'm not sure in the Constitution, Congressman, where the other social programs of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, where that stuff's supposed to be the top priority for government to focus on, because I thought it was supposed to be national defense, which is pretty wild. Congressman, we got about 20 seconds left here, but now that this is done, are we going to when do you guys actually start the conversation for the next fiscal year's budgets?
So we're in the process with budget. At the same time, the Appropriations Committee will now start to take up their planning for 2025. I would expect that they'll have some of the subcommittees working in April and May. We'll probably be voting on the floor of the House in June and July on the appropriations bills, with a goal that the Senate would approve them by September.
I like it. That is the goal. We'll see if we can follow that guideline and that deadline for sure. It's Congressman Ron Estes from here in the 4th Congressional District for the state of Kansas. Good friend of mine. Keep up the fight, my friend. It's always great to talk to you. Appreciate it very much. Got to take a break. Right back here on The Voice of Reason. Stay here.
This is The Voice of Reason with Andy Hoosier.